Today's presentation is how to be a STAR supervising instructor for CTRI applicants. We'll be reviewing all of the elements within the CTRI application requirements and then how you, as a supervising instructor, can support applicants throughout the application process. I'm Allie Gleaton and I'm the Credentialing Project Coordinator here at PATH International. Within my role, I am responsible for supporting CTRI applicants and their supervising instructors, reviewing and processing CTRI application paperwork, and upholding the policies and requirements put forth by the PATH International Credentialing Council. The Credentialing Council is the body that was responsible for developing the CTRI application process in its inaugural year. Since then, the Credentialing Council has continued to develop and maintain the application process. As of today, we've had over 15 subject matter experts within our industry that have been on the Credentialing Council and have contributed to the development of the application requirements and process. In addition to individuals from within our industry, public members have also contributed to the development and maintenance of the CTRI application process. Public members represent folks outside of PATH International who have a vested interest in the quality of the certification process and the professionals who earn the credential. So first things first, this is the map of what our day is going to look like for this presentation. So we'll go over the CTRI certification process. We'll go over the application requirements one by one, and then we'll dive into the supervisor qualifications. So I say supervisor because they're supervisor and they're supervising instructor. So I'm using supervisor as a general term here, but when we get to those qualifications, we'll take a closer look at whether that's just a general supervisor or if it's a supervising instructor. A supervising instructor being somebody who holds the PATH International certification in EAS. So throughout the different parts of the application, there's a little bit of different qualifications, and I'll make sure to point those out so that those are at the forefront for you. And then we'll go through the ways that you, as a supervising instructor, can support CTRI applicants. So those are folks who are working towards or working on their application. They probably haven't submitted it yet. Or perhaps if they've submitted their application, they're waiting for the results. And you can still support them during that time while they're waiting. And then once an applicant has their application approved, they then become a candidate. We'll talk a little bit more about this later on, but we'll also talk then about what you as a supervising instructor can do to support CTRI candidates. That is, individuals who have had their application approved and are preparing to take the certification exam. So to put a structure framework around all of this, the PATH International Certified Therapeutic Riding Instructor, or CTRI, is our entry-level certification. In the therapeutic riding field, PATH International has 3 levels of therapeutic riding instructor certification. The CTRI is that base foundational level. These are instructors who may be doing mounted or unmounted work, but they, regardless of whether they're doing mounted or unmounted, have the skills to be providing instruction of riding and horsemanship skills, and they, as such, have met established criteria and standards for the field. The criteria and standards for CTRI competency were established through a job task analysis that PATH International did initially in 2015, and then revisited and revalidated the results of that job task analysis in 2020. So these are the knowledge, skills, and abilities that current therapeutic riding instructors and potentially even novice or newer therapeutic riding instructors need to have in order to be employable in the field within PATH International member centers or premier accredited centers. So here we have the overall process. We have individuals coming to this from every angle, and more are coming from outside of the equine assisted services industry. They may be approaching this as a special education teacher, a recreational therapist. There are many different approaches to this. So we like to make it very clear that there are steps to this process. Not like it was with the registered therapeutic riding certification where we call it phases, because this is a bit more of a fluid process and people can start or stop it on their own accord. They can start to stop as quickly as they want. So we've just boiled it down to this overall process. However, that being said, there's of course preparation and there are prerequisites that they need to have in order to be prepared to even apply. So for our prerequisites, we have the adult and child CPR certification and first aid certification, of course, so they can prepare and be able to respond in the instance of emergencies. And then we also require a passing score on the PATH International Standards exam. And that's, of course, to make sure that they are aware of the PATH International Standards, how they are written, how to interpret them, and how to apply those standards. The standards exam score is valid for 1 year. And so when they go to submit their CTRI application, their standards exam can be no more than 1 year old on that date that they submit their application. When they submit their application, they then get the status of applicant. And from that date, they have 1 year from the date of their application purchase to submit their application. So right now, we have a lot of applicants that purchase the application and they wait several months before they go ahead and submit it. There's also just about an equal amount of folks who purchase the application and submit it on the very same day. They're aligning their submission date with their purchase date just to help keep it very clear to them in their mind when that year timeline starts. An important piece of the timeline too, though, is that the application may be submitted no less than 90 days before the applicant's preferred testing date. This time frame is determined through the 60-day review period in the PATH International office, as well as policies and possible limited availability from Pearson VUE. But otherwise, they can submit their application at any point in time. Once their application is approved, they may sign up for a testing appointment that is convenient for them. Once they submit their application, then there is up to 60 days processing time for that. So during this period, we're reviewing usually at least 80 or more applications. We receive several applications a week, and it takes quite a bit of time to thoroughly review them. While we are doing our best to lower that number by automating as many processes as we can, it still takes close to 60 days for most applicants. During those 60 days, we may request additional information. This can happen if we find that the information provided is a bit too vague for us to really objectively understand what the applicant is saying they did during their experience was. For example, we'll ask for more information to make sure that we understand or that we're interpreting what they put on their paperwork correctly so that we can then make a determination about whether or not it adequately fulfills the application requirements. It should be noted that if we have to request additional information or clarification, that can slow down the processing time. Applicants should strive to be as clear and specific as possible. After the 60 days, no later than 60 days, they will get a notification via email of whether or not their application has been approved. Their application is approved, they then gain the status of candidate. So at this point, we've said their application is approved and they are now a CTRI certification candidate, meaning that they are eligible to sit for the certification exam. The candidate will receive an authorization to test letter upon payment of the CTRI exam fee, and that authorization to test letter contains the necessary information to reserve an exam appointment with Pearson VUE, the facility that is administering the exam for us. The authorization to test letter is valid for 1 year from the date their application is approved. So even if an applicant wants to pay for and take their test, the authorization to test letter will still be valid for 1 year from the application approval date. Their authorization to test letter will have a date at the very top. That is the issue date. And then within the body of the authorization to test letter confirms that they have until X date to register and complete the certification exam. It's also important to note that the issuance date of the authorization to test letter will actually be after they pay the certification exam fee. Once they get their application approval, they'll get a link to pay the exam fee and instructions to pay it through their online portal. Once they pay the exam fee, every day we record who's purchased the exam and then we register them with Pearson VUE. Pearson VUE then issues the authorization to test letter, and that can be up to 48 hours after they've completed payment for the certification exam. Except in atypical circumstances, the candidate can expect that within 72 business hours after the candidate gets their authorization to test letter, they will be able to secure an exam appointment. Then the final step of the process is, of course, taking the certification exam. And the passing score for that is 250 points out of a possible 300. So that 250, that's the cut score. Candidates need to get a minimum of that in order to have passed the exam. If they are unsuccessful in passing the exam, they can retake it. The exam fee needs to be paid for each retake. So they need to contact Path International and let us know that they'd like to sign up for a retake. We'll then get them another invoice for the certification fee. They pay it, and then that same process happens once more. Once that payment is completed, then they'll actually get another authorization to test letter from Pearson VUE, which signals they're ready to go ahead and sign up for another exam appointment. So it's the same sequence before and after. And it's possible for the candidates to take the exam up to 3 times during the 1-year validity timeframe of their authorization to test letter. So they'll have their initial taking of the exam, and then they can retake the exam twice more while they have a valid authorization to test letter. Their first retake must be at least 30 days from their initial testing date, and their second retake must be at least 60 days from their second testing date. Please note that this date is determined by their exam date, not when they contact the office stating that they would like to retake the exam. So now we're going to dig a little bit deeper. This graphic should be familiar to most of you. This is the roadmap that is provided in the candidate handbook. So within this roadmap, we're kind of taking the whole process, we're taking the deadlines, and then we're adding to that. We have the individual elements for each of the application, the verification process that it entails to when an application is approved, and then a reminder that they can take the exam within 1 year from that. So this roadmap is still relevant. It's a helpful checklist, but there are additional checklists. You want to use this roadmap to ensure that your applicant has submitted everything they need to submit. And then we're going to move on and talk about the individual application requirements. So just to set the stage here for these application requirements, these requirements are designed to reflect the standards for accreditation by the National Commission of Certifying Agencies, or the NCCA. So NCCA is who we are third-party accredited through. They accredit all sorts of certification programs, with a lot of them being physical certification that require physical skills. So for example, that could be coaches, personal trainers. There are some out there for occupational therapy and physical therapy. So we picked NCCA because they have already accredited certifications that have that practical experience piece that's similar to what we need out of our instructors. So within those standards, they have very specific requirements as to how you can design a certification program. And all of the requirements, all of the standards for accreditation, they amount to making sure that the certification program is fair, that it's accessible, that it's clear what the expectations are, and those expectations are consistent. And then also how all of the pieces work together. They must ensure that there is impartial assessment of applicant competency and there is no bias in the system. And also that there are no conflict of interest at any level. That means not only between people preparing for the certification and individuals helping them prepare. That also goes for Path International staff. We cannot have any conflicts of interest with the applicants. So for example, if we know an applicant, then we have to recuse ourselves from reviewing their application. In that event, another Path International staff member will review the application. There is also the conflict of interest for video assessors. They also cannot know the applicants, and the conflict of interest goes all the way up to the Credentialing Council and the subject matter experts that design the requirements and most of all develop the exam questions. So these standards for accreditation are very intense and very in-depth as far as making sure that there are no conflict of interest and that any possibility of real or perceived bias is removed from the entire credentialing process, starting with the application. Above all, and all of these standards and all of these rationales behind them are to ensure that decisions about applicant competency are as objective as absolutely possible. So I wanted to make sure that we understand that this is the foundation for why we have designed the application the way that we have. And this actually carries on through to the supervision and sign-off pieces. So you'll see this again later on when we get to that section of the presentation. It's important to note that all parts of the application and the certification exam work together. Okay, so these are all of the competency components. All of these provide very important information that then helps to validate competency of the applicants and with the certification exam, the candidates. They all work together. No one piece of this process stands alone. They're all intricately linked. That's important to know because without one, then this process is not complete. So we have to look at all aspects of of all the pieces of the application as well as the certification exam to understand how they all come together to equate to validating competency. So now let's take a look at the individual requirement. Also, as we're going through those requirements, I do want to know on the far right-hand side here, I have a column for JTA domain. JTA domain stands for Job Task Analysis, and so our Job Task Analysis from 2015, and again, revalidated in 2020. There are 5 domains of knowledge, skills, and abilities, and here on these slides that I'm going over now for the overview or for the requirements, I will tell you specifically what JTA domains that particular requirement links to, just so that you're again aware of how it contributes to the overall picture. So we're keeping in mind that these all work together, but for now, we'll look at them section by section. Part 1 is our equine handling skills. So the purpose of this part is to document that applicants have demonstrated well-established skills and experience handling equine. Only hours spent directly handling equines can count towards this requirement. So oftentimes we have applicants ask if they can do online education or online courses to apply towards this, and the answer to that is no. These are equine handling skills, physical time actually physically handling the equines. So if we look at the JTA for this section, even though it's one part, it actually feeds into 3 parts or 3 domains of knowledge, skills, and abilities for applicants. So that again is just a reminder of how all of these things work together. Part 2, equine management skills. So this is documentation that applicants have a minimum breadth of knowledge of equine management and have demonstrated the specific skills needed for the management of equines in therapeutic riding activities. So we're not just saying you need to know temperature, heart rate, respiration. We're saying that you need to know this information and then also know how to apply it in a therapeutic riding setting. So this is part 2 is either a checklist or a certifications or education that covers everything on the checklist. So the checklist was rolled over from the registered therapeutic riding instructor process with a few additions and a few tweaks to it. It is hugely important and it does feed into the knowledge, skills, and ability for general equine handling, as well as lesson management. Next, part 3. This is the video demonstration of riding instruction and communication of riding skills. The purpose of this requirement is demonstration of minimal level of riding knowledge and skills that are necessary to correctly and clearly instruct the whats, hows, and whys of basic riding skills to provide instruction for riders up to and including intermediate level. What we're assessing in the video applies to, as you can see, all 5 domains of knowledge, skills, and abilities from the job task analysis. So everything in the video contributes to our understanding of the candidate's knowledge, skills, and abilities across the board for competency as an entry-level therapeutic riding instructor. We'll go more into the video a little bit later on. It's a big piece of what people have questions on and spend a lot of time preparing for, so we'll definitely talk more about that. Part 4, evidence of working with individuals with disabilities. So the purpose of this part of the application is documentation that applicants have experience directly working and interacting with individuals with disabilities, either in a therapeutic riding setting or an outside experience. So that direct, again, is very important. We want to make sure that they are interacting with those individuals. And ideally, of course, it would be a wide range of disabilities, but we don't have requirements around that. We just require that it's either in a therapeutic writing setting, or if it's outside of a therapeutic writing setting, that it's something like a special education classroom or a group home or some setting where there are individuals with disabilities that the applicant is not related to. That's an important piece here, that the hours working or interacting solely with one individual or individuals with whom the applicant is not related is not sufficient to fulfill their requirements of this part. We have had applicants who, for example, are caretakers of family members with disabilities, and they've asked if those hours can count towards the application. The answer to that is no. The reason for that is that, again, that conflict of interest. Also, if they're working with somebody they know, they're going to handle things very differently. So what we want them to have is experience in is working with individuals with disabilities in a professional settings where they themselves are acting as a professional versus a personal caretaker or a caretaker who's related to the individual. So it just changes their setting, their mind frame a little bit. That's what we want to make sure of, is that they have that experience, because that's what's going to more directly apply to being in their arena and instructing individuals that they don't know. And on part 4, it contributes to 3 of the job task analysis domains. Part 5, this is another big one. This is the evidence of supervised therapeutic writing and lessons. This is probably a large reason of why many of you are here, to understand the requirements of the supervising instructor for the teaching hours of the CTRI applicants, and also to understand the parameters around the teaching. So we'll go into those a bit later on, but the primary purpose of this is, of course, documentation that applicants have experience working directly and interacting with individuals with disabilities, but then also they're doing that in a therapeutic writing setting. So they're taking their skills from working with individuals with disabilities, their experience with handling equines, their knowledge of being in a therapeutic writing setting, and they're applying that to actual instruction of therapeutic writing lessons. Again, part 5 feeds into all 5 areas or all 5 domains of the job task analysis. So again, it's big and it encompasses a lot. Okay, as I mentioned, we're going to take a closer look at the video. As far as actually compiling the application materials, it tends to be the video that takes the most amount of time. So the video, as I mentioned, it's big because it feeds into all 5 domain areas of the job task analysis. The requirements for the video, including the amount of time, originated from the writing accommodation option for the registered TRI certification, which was developed in 2014. So the components considered to measure instructor competency have stood the test of time. The scoring has certainly evolved to be much more precise for purposes of the CTRI application, and that is in the interest of objectively quantifying competency. The video designed to confirm that applicants have the competency and the teaching skills to teach the participant the what's, how's, and why's for multiple writing skills. So in the previous registered TRI certification process, candidates were expected to demonstrate their ability to instruct what's, how's, and why's for one writing skill in a 20-minute demonstration. And now we're asking them to demonstrate the what's, how's, and why's for multiple writing skills within that 20-minute demonstration. We do recognize that it does cover walk, trot, and canter. And through our job task analysis, we learned that not everybody teaches walk, trot, and canter. However, the vast majority of instructors do. And so it's relevant for us to assess that, not only just for the purposes of being able to instruct multiple writing skills, but then if we confirm that applicants have that competency, that's a huge step towards career sustainability. So even if they're at a program where they're not teaching those things initially, they may perhaps advance to another program or move across the country and need to go to another facility where that is an expectation. Because again, through our job task analysis, we did find that that was a common expectation. That's why it became part of the requirements. The video requires walk, trot, and canter, and then ultimately the applicants are encouraged to choose a writer with intermediate skill level. But the writer can be any writer of the applicant's choosing. So it can be an able-bodied writer, it can be a writer in their program, it can be their supervising instructor, or if they have a mentor who is providing more in-depth education and training and guidance, career guidance, it can also be that individual. The overall idea for the video is it is a quantitative assessment. So we're not talking qualitative, we're not assessing whether or not the what's, how's, and why's are of a particular style. What we're assessing is it correct and is it clear? So did they provide a clear instruction for a rain aid, for example? Was that instruction acceptable based on the industry accepted terminology for using a rain aid? Mentors and supervising instructors should be cautious when writing in their applicants' video submissions. Of course, they want their applicant to be successful. So a lot of times they self-correct and then the applicant doesn't actually have that opportunity to provide those corrections. And then that means that they are unable to demonstrate the full scope of their knowledge, skills, and ability to instruct the writing skills. While it is allowed for mentors or supervising instructors to write for their applicant, the applicant must still demonstrate all what's, how's, and why's. However, that being said, they do self-corrections and the applicant acknowledges it, they still get credit for it. So it's not a huge disadvantage, but it is something for the applicant to think about. And along those lines, the video should demonstrate the applicant's personal knowledge, skills, and abilities of writing skill instruction. So again, if they don't have opportunities to provide that instruction, then it doesn't get demonstrated within that video, and then we can't score it. Also along those lines, we have applicants who will often ask the writer to comment on or describe the aids that they are using while writing. And while that is certainly an effective teaching tool, it doesn't demonstrate the applicant's personal knowledge, skills, and abilities. So we discourage applicants from using that particular teaching technique unless they are prepared to acknowledge if the writer is correct and incorrect, and then elaborate on why and how they were right or wrong. Additionally, having that effective conversations for multiple skills is just difficult to do within that 20-minute time frame. So that's something that we caution applicants from doing, but if that is their style, it is possible. They just need to be mindful of how they do it. Then that also feeds into the assessment focuses on accuracy and effectiveness of in-the-moment instruction and timeliness of feedback that then also results in improvement of the equine's way of going. So you're discussing what the writer is doing, you're giving them that in-the-moment feedback so that they can improve their ride, and you see that evidence in how the equine is responding to the writer. But again, a big piece of this is that in the moment. So if the applicant is choosing to utilize a more conversational teaching style, it can be difficult, but not impossible to achieve that in the moment feedback. So in general, it's best to just focus on being very specific, very clear with the what's, how's, and why's, and then providing that in the moment specific praise and in the moment feedback, confirming that the writer has correctly understood the instruction and executing the writing skill correctly. So with that, then the applicants must instruct and observe the writer's response to their instruction, and then verbalize the corrections or confirmations to demonstrate their, as in the applicant, awareness of the effectiveness of the instruction. Another question that comes up often about the video is in regards to the 20-minute time limit on the video. In many cases, candidates find themselves in a situation where they might be using a tripod to film. So their video might include, for example, the camera going on the tripod and the applicant going out to the arena and talking to the writer for a little bit. Then they start the instruction. And then also when the writer dismounts, then the applicant comes back over to the camera and turns it off. In those cases, the video might be over 25 minutes, and that's perfectly acceptable. We say that the 20 minutes means that the applicant's instruction is 20 continuous minutes. That means nothing is edited and it is all one take. It is a continuous recording and all of their applicant's instruction takes place within 20 minutes within the recording. Also, to confirm, a lot of questions come up about the equipment in the writing arena, what's okay, what's not okay. And in general, TAC arena equipment in the writing area are expected to comply with PATH International standards. So if you or the applicant have questions about that, they can certainly reach out to us here in the PATH International office. Or if you Hopefully, however, applicants already have that knowledge fresh in their mind from doing their standards exam. One of the other questions that comes up around this too is, do they need to have a ramp? And no, definitely do not need to have a ramp. Again, since it's the writer of their choosing, the ramp is not needed to mount the writer, then there doesn't need to be a ramp. So now we're going to get into the general parameters for supervision and sign off. So again, all of the requirements are designed to reflect standards for accreditation by NCCA, and that includes who supervises and signs off on each of the requirements. So again, we're making sure that everything that is provided that's signed off is quantitative. We're not asking supervising instructors to give a quality assessment. We're asking them just to confirm the hours and activities reported and documented by the applicant are in fact correct. But also then with the supervision and sign off, it's also designed to assure that there's industry specific training to grow our own. And when we say grow our own, we are referring to PATH International as an organization, as well as of the members and certified professionals. We know that it is better to train from within. And the supervision and sign off is also designed to support that. We are again avoiding conflicts of interest and removing as much real or perceived bias as possible. But also by requiring that the supervision and sign off is from PATH International certified professionals, we are setting a specific bar to ensure consistency in the competency of certificates. So while we're still making a copy of a copy, we want to make sure then that the fidelity of that copy from generation to generation is just as strong. And so through the supervision and sign-off requirements, we can maintain that. We can make sure that as we're growing our own and training from within, that the competency only gets stronger and stronger versus more and more diluted. The supervision and sign-off also promote an impartial assessment of applicant competency. This particularly relates to the elements for which a familial relation cannot sign off. We want to make sure that, though they have a vested interest, whoever's signing off is ethical and free of bias. As a reminder, when signing off, it's quantitative, not qualitative. You are saying that this applicant has successfully completed these particular experience hours. This also makes sure that PATH International can be making decisions as objectively as possible when reviewing applications. So now we're going to jump into supervisor qualifications for each part of the application. Keep in mind that the qualifications are designed for the reasons we just spoke about to make sure, in particular, that there's no bias. We're now going to look at part 1. As we go through the different sections, there's always the option to fulfill the requirements in a therapeutic writing setting. So for part 1, we want to make sure the supervisor has PATH International certification, that they're not related to the applicant, that they do not control the employment of the applicant, and do not sign paychecks issued to the applicant. So those last two in particular have to do with if you are an employer of an applicant, you've already made certain decisions about that individual's competency. And so, particularly if you control their employment, if you've hired them, for example, you've already made some decisions about that individual's competency. So that actually is a bit of a conflict of interest because it includes potentially bias. So we want to make sure that even though this is quantitative, that whoever is signing off is ethically signing off and saying, yes, this individual did these hours. And I do not have a conflict of interest in saying that. Another aspect of this is that the individual who is signing off on this paperwork cannot personally gain financial benefit or compensation as a direct result of the applicant earning a passing score on the certification exam. So what this boils down to is basically that there cannot be money exchanging hands or a bonus given to the supervising instructor when the candidate successfully completes the certification exam. Again, this is the certification exam, so supervising instructors and mentors can be compensated for their time for assisting applicants, for training them, for preparing them, but all of those payments should be completed before the candidate sits for the certification exam. That way, again, there's no real or even perceived bias or advantage. Applicants may also choose to complete requirements as part of a recognized equestrian organization. We define a recognized equestrian organization as a structured collective of professionals that delivers, organizes, endorses, and/or promotes equestrian-based activities and maintains a training and certification process for the people who participate in or lead its local programs. We often get questions about if a particular organization or kind of experience will qualify. We provide this definition in a handful of examples in the CTRI Candidate Handbook. Again, whoever is signing off on the hours performed by that candidate is not related to the applicant. They do not control employment of the applicant. They do not sign paychecks issued to the applicant, and they will not financially gain from the candidate passing the certification exam. Now we have part 2, evidence of equine management skills. In the first section, the equine management skills checklist part A must be signed off on by a PATH International certified professional or a PATH International higher education member representative. So for this, again, it's very specific to therapeutic riding. We want to make sure that whoever is signing off on that checklist, that they have current PATH International certification. It does not need to be a CTRI. It can be a riding instructor, a driving instructor, an interactive vaulting instructor, somebody just holding a PATH International certification that also includes ESMHL certification. That individual, however, also does need to have a minimum of 120 cumulative career hours of experience of equine management. And we say that because we want them to have well-established skills in equine management so that they can then knowledgeably be signing off on somebody else also having those skills. The documentation of those hours is only required if the application is randomly selected for an intense audit. We've had supervising instructors contacting us and saying, well, how do I submit those hours? And if you want to submit those hours ahead of time, you certainly can, but you don't have to submit it as a part of the applicant's paperwork. You don't have to submit it, for example, for you to be eligible to supervise. Again, the only time that we would request documentation of those hours is if an application is selected for intense audit. And just as a reminder to clear things up, we're talking about the 120 hours of equine management experience for part 2, not the 120 hours of teaching experience for part 5. This same supervisor may also sign off on the equine management skills checklist part B. This section also must be signed off on by a PATH International certified professional or a PATH International higher education member representative. Candidates may also choose to complete the requirements for this section by submitting evidence of education, certification, certificate programs, trainings, or that kind of thing through which they gain the skills that are on the checklist. The applicant is providing all of the documentation for this section. A lot of times, candidates will come to us having completed things like higher education degree, where the listed skills were covered in their coursework. So they'll submit proof of completion, of course, alongside a syllabus or course outline. They're not providing any sign off, and they do self-report that all of the things on the checklist have been covered, and then we verify the information they submit aligns with that. Because this information is self-reported by the candidate and they are submitting all proof of completion, there are no specific supervising instructor requirements. Part 3, there are no specific qualifications for this, either from your standpoint, because the video is assessed by PATH International trained assessors, and those assessors are formally the registered therapeutic riding instructor evaluators. So they have long-standing experience in assessing the riding pattern and instruction of what's, hows, and whys applicable to the riding skills required by the pattern. From your standpoint, though, as a supervising instructor, it is advised that you have more advanced riding skill instructions than the applicant. And then that way you can give them feedback on their instruction for the video, and you can give them guidance on what they may need to build up on or elaborate on. I also generally advise that if you aren't writing the pattern yourself, you are watching the filming of the video to provide guidance as needed, bearing in mind that the submitted video must be one take. So if you do see any corrections, the recording does have to be started over. Part 4 is an instructor, program director, equine manager, barn manager, volunteer coordinator, supervisor, etc., who directly observed or supervised the applicant during the hours documented. So the person who is signing off needs to have directly observed or supervised the applicant and can attest to the applicant's participation in activities in which they interact directly with individuals with disabilities. And this brings us to part 5. This is perhaps the strictest section in regards to supervisor qualifications. So first things first, they need to be a current Path International CTRI credential holder. So they need to have either transitioned to the CTRI credential when it became available, or they need to have earned the CTRI credential through going through this certification process themselves. They then need to have also accrued a minimum of 120 clock hours teaching therapeutic writing lessons since establishing the CTRI credential. They need to complete all of those hours before they start supervising the CTRI applicant teaching. Supervising instructors may be chosen to complete an audit of these 120 hours. You may choose to preempt any audits by completing and returning documentation of these 120 hours before the applicant begins teaching. While not required for eligibility, completion of the audit will give instructors the eligible to supervise CTRI applicants designation in our directories. Instructors are welcome to send in this form at any time, regardless of if they are currently working with an applicant. We will sometimes have applicants calling and concerned that their instructor they're working with doesn't have the eligible to supervise CTRI applicant designation. Lack of that designation doesn't necessarily mean an instructor cannot supervise, but it does mean that they haven't completed an audit and we cannot verify those hours. So everybody who's doing the teaching hours, their supervising instructor, has at least 120 clock hours since they have confirmed their understanding and their competency of the CTRI criteria. So the transition process that allowed for that to take place for individuals who came over from the registered therapeutic writing instructor process. But then, of course, the CTRI certification itself does that for the newbies. And then they themselves have to do those 120 clock hours of teaching therapeutic writing lessons with the CTRI criteria fresh in their mind before they supervise additional applicants. Also here for the conflict of interest. They cannot be related to the applicant. You cannot control employment of the applicant. Can't sign off on paychecks issued to the applicant and personally will not financially gain from the applicant earning a passing score on the certification exam. So then let's get into what you as the supervising instructor can do to support applicants. So we're starting here with the applicants. So these are the individuals that are preparing the application materials. What can you do to help them prepare to meet the requirements for each component of the application? We'll be looking at this through the lens of what the applicants should work on. This is going to be kind of your guide for what you would encourage them to be developing and practicing. For adult and child CPR, the basic first aid certifications, training and emergency response. This also comes into play in the teaching hours. You want them to be practicing emergency dismounts, but overall, what that application requirement is making sure that they are prepared to respond in the event of emergency. Then we have the application component of passing scores on the standards exam. So what they need to work on is awareness of Path International standards and how they apply to therapeutic writing best practices. Next, we have the application component of the Certified Professional Code of Ethics. What applicants need to work on here is conducting themselves and business activities in accordance with expectations for Path International certified professionals. If you are not already regularly reviewing the Code of Ethics, it can be a really good exercise to go through that on a regular basis, and particularly with the instructors that are approaching the certification, and make sure they really understand what's in that Code of Ethics, that they're willing to fully adopt and uphold what is in there. For part 1, equine handling skills, the skills they need to work on is experiencing handling an equine in an environment with multiple equines present. So, we're not looking just at personal horse ownership. We're talking about an equine environment An equine in an environment with other equines around them. So this is, leading equines to turn out, grooming in the grooming area. It's managing or handling equines in the presence of other equines as well as people. Part 2, equine management skills. So what's on the checklist is really about equine health and welfare, making sure that applicants understand what is important and to ensure that equines can successfully participate in equine assisted services. And that if they're not healthy, that they know what to look for and what the response should be. And also a part of that is just experience safely navigating with and around equines. So this is where more of like the stall interaction happens, and all of that is just making sure that they know how to move around the equine safely. For the part 3 video, what they should be working on is really focusing on their ability to safely and effectively instruct a rider to perform basic riding skills. Those writing skills that are identified by the writing pattern. A lengthy and detailed rubric for the video assessment is provided in the CTRI Candidate Handbook. And then also intensely focusing on the accuracy and effectiveness of their in-the-moment instruction and timeliness of feedback. We should be able to see the improvement in the rider and therefore improvement in the equine. They should also work on instructing and observing the rider's response, then verbalizing corrections and confirmations to demonstrate awareness of the effectiveness of their instruction. So that's, again, the feedback, but we see a lot of times that they will just say, good job, or give very unspecific praise and feedback. And so it is best for them to verbalize everything that they're seeing, but also make it specific so that they can demonstrate that they understand their instruction is making a difference in a positive way. I often remind applicants when they call with questions that our video assessors cannot make any inference on the applicant's knowledge. We cannot be sure an applicant has a particular piece of knowledge unless it is specifically verbalized and demonstrated. Part 4, evidence of working with individuals with disabilities. So what they should be working on is just experience engaging appropriately with individuals with disabilities to whom they are not related. But again, here ideally, it would be a wide range of folks so that they can be most successful in teaching the wide range of populations, but that's not necessarily a requirement, just as long as it's not somebody that they're not related to. And then also through this interaction, then they should also develop experience adapting to situations based on the population served. So knowing that with certain populations, there may be certain behavioral challenges. And so how will they adapt to the situation to deal with those behavioral challenges? How will they adapt to situations where there are physical challenges, that kind of thing. So again, just the more experience they have here with the wider range of individuals with disabilities, the more successful they're going to be. Part 5, so the therapeutic riding lessons, what they need to work on is proper interpretation and application of the core mounted and ground activity standards. So again, PATH International standards, how do they apply to instructors? And then they're also through, and that their teaching hours, gaining experience managing volunteers in the lesson environment and building their knowledge of how the senses of the equine and equine behavior affect riders in the lesson environment. And of course, as we all know, one of the hardest parts of the job is reading and responding to the ever-changing environment in the arena. How will they respond if a particular participant isn't responding to the lesson plan? How will they respond if an equine is not giving the desired response to a particular aid? The more experience they can get with that, again, the more successful that they're going to be. Not only as a therapeutic riding instructor, but if they have that experience, it's going to feed over into the video. So now that you have all of this information, let's look at some of the resources available. I'll highlight the free resources first. There's a lot of information and a lot of expectations, but it's all manageable to understand if you take a look at what is available to you. So all of these free resources that I've listed here, all of this information is on the PATH International website. But on that CTRI webpage, we have step-by-step instructions. We've simplified it to 3 steps. So within those 3 steps, there are a bunch of instructions and including pricing for the whole certification process. We provide instructions and then any of the relevant purchases, the pricing is right there. We also provide a copy of the video assessment. So applicants can download that and may also use one of the materials I'm going to talk about later, and then use those to help them prepare to do the video. The most inclusive resource is the CTRI Candidate Handbook. So on the website, it breaks down or provides you an outline of the steps. However, the CTRI Candidate Handbook goes into deep detail for candidates on the job description for the CTRI and the criteria. And the criteria is what provides the scope of the expectations for knowledge, skills, and ability. If you have questions about whether or not an applicant needs to know something or to what level they need to know it, take a look at that criteria. We have a video preparation and self-assessment activity available. This is a worksheet which has broken down each of the components of the writing pattern so the applicant can practice writing down or speaking out loud what their instruction, particularly what the what's, how's, and why's would be. And as they write those down or they say them aloud, they'll start to hear the gaps, how their instruction might not provide all of the information to the writer that is actually necessary to help them understand the aids that they need to apply and when and how and why. There's also an example video. So that example video is often helpful to view alongside the applicant and give them some ideas. The example video has a little bit of the conversational style, asking the writer what they're doing, but then also acknowledging that the information is correct. It's an example of that teaching technique and how that can be done successfully. It's not a perfect score video, so it's a realistic example. And the Credentialing Council will continue to work to provide more examples, ideally a perfect example or a perfect score as well. Although we have the example available, I suggest that candidates avoid memorizing a script and are mindful that they are teaching the writer in front of them. Also among the free resources is allowances. So you may be contacted by somebody who's in a very rural area. They're potentially 3 hours or more away from you, but they want supervision. They may want to do that long distance or virtual. Or if you want to do it long distance or virtual to minimize travel impacts, it is a possibility open to applicants. They can request an allowance that is reviewed by the Credentialing Council. The criteria for that review is included within the allowance booklet. There's a link to that in the PDF of the Candidate Handbook. So now we're going to hop in to supporting candidates. As a reminder, we're using candidates here now because we're talking about individuals whose applications have been approved and they are now preparing to sit for the certification exam. The certification exam in itself is a proctored exam. Candidates are given 90 minutes to complete it. There can be accommodations for additional time for disability-related reasons. There's information on requesting accommodations in the Candidate Handbook. So the exam is 85 multiple choice questions. 80 of those questions are scored and 5 are unscored. Those 5 unscored questions are questions that we are testing out to implement in future exams. So only the 80 scored questions factor into the candidate's final score. The unscored questions are not identified as such. They are just intermingled with all of the scored questions so that we can get really valid statistics on how they perform. So with all that said and done, candidates will answer 85 questions in 90 minutes. I know that sounds like a short time frame, but so far we have not had a single candidate communicate that they needed more than 90 minutes or more than the time allotted to them if they had an accommodation for extended times. That 90 minutes is an accurate time frame of how long the exam takes. And the exam administration is computer-based unless an accommodation has been granted for pencil and paper administration. It is important to note all exams are proctored regardless of the administration type. The passing score we talked about earlier is 250 out of 300 possible points. And we did talk about retakes earlier as well. So they can retake the exam twice after their initial sitting of the exam, for a total of 3 exam attempts in the year that their authorization to test letter is valid. The full certification fee must be remitted in order for the candidate to receive an additional authorization to test letter for the exam. And then also we touched base on a maximum of 3 exam attempts are possible during the 1-year validity term of an authorization to test letter. So now we'll look at the free resources you can use to support candidates. So again, you can look at the step-by-step instructions on the CTRI webpage. You'll particularly want to look at step 3 and the certification exam section. That's going to provide information about the certification exam. We also provide a little sample of what they would see on the computer screen when they go to Pearson VUE. There's a little mock test so they can test out the functionality and actually visually see how the questions will be presented to them, how they'll select answers, and how they will submit the answers. I do want to note that the practice questions on that are not at all related to EAS, but they'll get the general idea of what to expect from the testing environment. The PATH International Standards Manual is another resource that is free for members. Since applicants do not have to be members, they may not necessarily get the standards for free. But if you're a member, you can share your electronic version with them. They're going to want to really hone in on standards for mounting activities, so mandatory and not mandatory, but all standards for mounted activities, as well as precautions and contraindications. There are questions on the exam that are related to precautions and contraindications. The candidate handbook is, of course, another big free resource, just like for the application. In there, we have the certification exam prep checklist, certification exam study tips, and the resources consulted in development of exam questions. So this is a long list of resources, and they are all fully optional. Purchasing all of these resources, it does not necessarily increase their chances of passing the exam. None of the exam questions are pulled verbatim from any resource, PATH International or otherwise. So all of the exam questions require application of knowledge, skills, and abilities. And also free resources related to supporting candidates is reasonable accommodations. Possible accommodations include a reader, translator, or interpreter, a private room, or a reduced distraction environment, and extended testing time up to time and a half. Now we have purchasable resources to support candidates. So candidates are not required to purchase any of these items in order to be successful on the exam, nor are they the only resources that may adequately prepare candidates. So that's the same for you. You're not required to purchase these. They may be helpful to have in your library, but purchasing these would not necessarily mean that your applicants would be guaranteed to pass the exam. They still need to be able to apply their knowledge, skills, and abilities to be able to answer the questions. That goes into the CTRI Skills Book. So the Skills Book is designed to help candidates practice a structured critical thinking process to guide their thought process in selecting the correct answer for exam questions. So a lot of people have purchased the CTRI Skills Book believing that it's going to give them the answers, right? If they memorize the info in the Skills Book, then they'll have all of the answers to what's on the exam. And that's not necessarily the case because the majority of the questions on the exam are scenario-based. So there are multiple things to consider in order to be able to answer the question. And as such, they need to use a critical thinking process in order to apply their knowledge, skills, and abilities and answer the exam question. I want to stress again that this guide is fully optional and does not guarantee a passing score. The candidate still has to, again, apply their knowledge, skills, and abilities to the best of their capacity to answer the questions on the exam. There is also the PATH International Instructor Education Guide. It is a good to reference, particularly for postural implications and TAC and equipment implications, but it really prepares folks to a novice level, so a level even above the CTRI. So again, good to have in your library, but not necessarily going to provide a passing score on the certification exam. It's not designed specifically for the CTRI. It does cover much more information. So it'll prepare them beyond the certification exam. And with that, then, we come to a close on the presentation. I want to emphasize that everything talked about today is from the perspective of a supervising instructor. A supervising instructor is someone who is supervising and providing that base level of support to applicants that they can be successful. What we've talked about here today is not mentorship. So what is being a mentor? A mentor supports an applicant before, during, and after the certification process. They provide education, they provide training, They provide prompting for self-reflection and professional development. It's an all-encompassing role for performing the job of a therapeutic riding instructor. And as a supervising instructor, your primary task is to ensure that applicants have the resources they need and the understanding they need to be successful on the application and and certification exams. So your job as a supervising instructor would theoretically be a bit more simple as a mentor. If you choose to be a mentor, you can of course be doing all of the things we've discussed as a supervising instructor and providing above and beyond, but this presentation has covered the role of the supervising instructor. Thank you for joining me here today, and you are welcome to email any questions to myself at agleaton@pathinternational.org or to our general CTRI email at ctricertification@pathinternational.org. And of course, there's a link for our CTRI webpage, pathinternational.org/certification/CTRI. Thank you and have a wonderful day.